Hi and welcome to Z Games. Recorded live at 4ZZZ Studios in Brisbane and broadcast nationally over the Community Radio Network, Z Games brings you the latest gaming news, reviews and interviews from across Australia and around the world.
Welcome again to another exciting episode of Z Games, which I can tell already is going to be your favourite radio program for the year of 2014. Joining me in the studio for this episode, Mr. Razor.
Hello.
There he is. Look at him. Look at his face.
Yeah, look at me.
Look at him, listeners. You can't. Mr. Jody McGregor.
Hi, guys.
He's here to bring an air of legitimacy to this whole nonsense. And I am Lee. Who knows if we'll have other people in the studio by the end of this episode. We might.
I'd wager that we will.
It'll be exciting.
Yep.
Special guests.
Special guest. Well, speaking of special guests, we have Na from Witchbeam. They've got a game called Assault Android Cactus, and we'll be talking all about that later in the program.
We're getting a thumbs up from the back of the room.
And also, Jody's been playing another indie game called Particulars.
Yeah, also by an Australian developer, by See-Through from down in Sydney.
But let's kick this episode off, as usual, with the week in gaming news headlines. Mr. Lee.
SimCity will soon be playable offline in a new single-player mode. Maxis General Manager Patrick Buchner posted the announcement to the SimCity website earlier this week, although a specific time frame for the update was not mentioned. The update will also allow users to install custom mods. SimCity released last year for the PC and came under heavy criticism from the consumers and the gaming media when the servers required for users to play the game went offline for extended periods of time. So that's going to be interesting for the 7 or 8 people who are still playing SimCity.
Well, I might actually play it now.
That's true.
Someone who hasn't tried it yet, I might actually be motivated to check it out.
Card game Magic the Gathering is set to receive the Hollywood treatment. 20th Century Fox has hired writer/producer Simon Kinberg, whose credits include X-Men First Class, Elysium and Abraham Lincoln Vampire Hunter, so obviously, quite a pedigree there, to oversee production on what is hoped to be a series of films. Eric Hewitt, a.k.a. Ghost Ayami, a pro gamer well known in the competitive Halo scene, has landed a job at 343 Studios to help create the next Halo game. It's presumed that Hewitt will use his incredible poning skills. He wrote poning in the news, people, with a P. I have to deal with this. To assist in balancing the multiplayer portion of the next, as yet untitled, Halo game.
All right, that's it for the news. You're listening to Z Games. Next up, we'll be talking to Na from Witchbeam. You're listening to Z Games. Our guest in the studio right now, his name is Sanatana Mishra. He is one of 3 members of Witchbeam Studios who have a game out on Steam called Assault Android Cactus, which is coming out this year for the PS4 and PS3.
That's right. It's coming, not to PS3, sorry. It's coming out to PS4 and PS Vita.
Yep.
And also Wii U. I know not many people have that, but I think it's going to be pretty good anyway.
Fantastic. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Oh, no problem.
Would you like to explain what Assault Android Cactus is about in your own words?
Okay. So Assault Android Cactus is a kind of manic twin-stick shoot-'em-up. It's a game that the 3 of us have been wanting to make games like this for a while. We used to be industry veterans, I guess you could call us, working for big studios. And then about a year ago, we all quit our jobs and decided to go full-time onto this project. It's kind of a retro game, but not especially. It's got modern graphics and modern approach to the design, but we wanted to do something really interesting in the shoot-'em-up, twin-stick shooter space.
You mentioned that you were industry veterans. Would you care to tell us what studios or which games you guys have worked on?
All right, so I've spent about 5-6 years in the industry, pretty much just working at Sega Studios Australia here in Brisbane. They've now closed down, unfortunately, but I did work on a terrible game called Stormrise. I'm really, really sorry if anybody played that game is listening right now. I worked on a slightly less terrible game in the official Olympic game for 2012. That one wasn't too bad, so I'm not that sorry if you bought that one. And also the Castle of Illusion remake that came out recently. And I thought, that one's all right, so you probably got your money's worth.
Very cool.
And yeah, Tim, who's one of the other developers, Tim Dawson, he's been all over the place working at Ratbag down in South Australia. Then he was at Team Bondi working on LA Noire. Up here in Brisbane on at Pandemic on the rumoured cancelled Batman game, which I don't know if I can say anything specific, but yeah. And then he was at Sega with me as well. Jeff, who's doing our music and sound design, Jeff Van Dyke, the third member of the team, he's worked on just about everything and anything in the industry, dating back to working on the first Need for Speed and Skitchin, which I know you're a fan of.
Yes, Skitchin. Yeah, Skitchin.
Really love Skitchin.
Oh, man.
And the game.
The Road Rash with rollerblades.
Yeah,
Such
it's fantastic.
Excellent game. So many fond memories. For you guys who haven't seen or heard of the game, you rollerbladed through a course and down the highway, and you can grab onto the backs of cars to gain momentum and also punch other skaters in the face.
Amazing.
Which is awesome.
And you can pick up weapons too, like a tire iron.
Yeah.
So Assault Android Cactus,
Yep.
the original idea, where did it come from?
Well, it's actually a concept that Tim's had for the better part of a decade now. So he's the artist and programmer on the team, and also his original concept for all the characters in the world. He's actually got sketches on his one of those websites where you keep sketches and art and things dating back to 10 years ago, where he drew up the character for the first time and really wanted to make an interesting game with Cactus. Mm-hmm. And then more recently, a couple of years ago, he started working on a prototype of his own and developing the idea of doing a twin stick shoot 'em up with a bit of bullet hell influence. And it's kind of a different way of doing twin stick shooters though. Like if you've seen the game, it's got a lot of dynamic elements in it. So we tried to have changing levels that shift over time, as opposed to having something that you move through. We have arena style levels. And then elements in that level will drastically change. So walls become holes and floors and change back into pillars, blocking you in different ways, all while you're just playing seamlessly. And then on top of that, we developed, or he came up with this idea, actually, I think it's a great one, was a battery mechanic where we've actually replaced lives and we've gone for like an energy system. So you can get knocked down, which is like the typical death in a game, an infinite number of times, but you don't actually fail the mission until your android runs out of battery energy. So you get knocked down, spam a button, and you're back up and fighting, but you've lost some time, some precious energy, and you'll have to actually go that much harder to complete the level.
Yeah, I like that the health meter in the game is a battery meter that looks just like my Android phone's battery meter and lasts about the same length of time.
Sweet.
It's just as infuriating to watch dribble away. So, yeah, well done there.
To be fair, a lot of these iOS and Android battery meters looked completely different when we originally made our battery meter. Just like all the other great design ideas we've had stolen, like our crown mechanic that ended up being in Super Mario 3D World.
Bullet hell genre, I guess most players would think of it as an old school genre. I guess it must be pretty hard to balance the difficulty in a game like that.
Absolutely, especially because we've got a lot more bullet hell elements with our enemy types and very traditional bullet hell bosses. So we get a lot of...
Can I just stop you there for the listeners who just tuned in and don't know what bullet hell is? Maybe just a quick rundown?
So bullet hell represents a style of game, like a traditional shoot 'em up that you find in the arcades 10, 15 years ago, where you're flying through, like traditionally you're a spaceship or something moving through, and there are just hundreds of projectiles on the screen, often moving very, very slowly, creating a pattern that you have to weave between and navigate through. And so all of the patterns that you have to deal with in the game are increasingly complex, as in they'll have accelerating movement speeds or spiral type behaviors and things like that. So it becomes all about dodging through these patterns, and they call it bullet hell because it's like so many bullets on the screen. It's like you're in bullet hell.
Yep. So games like Gradius, would you consider that?
Gradius is not quite bullet hell because it's more like a traditional shoot 'em up. There's not so many, but you got light bullet hell games like Ikaruga. Many people might have heard of that one. That's a classic arcade game that's kind of bullet hell, but there's a lot of other ones coming out of like the cave shoot 'em ups. I don't know if you know the Japanese style shoot 'em ups. They're on iOS and Android now, I think, so you can check them out there as well. I like the genre myself. I mean, ours is a hybrid, which is a way, like Ray was saying, it is actually quite difficult to balance it for all the players, the types of players that we get, because we have people coming on the forums going, this game is so easy, I can S+ every level, and
I hate those people.
I can go everything. I'm
those
like,
people are jerks.
That's cool. And oftentimes, they're liking the game. If you get to that point, you're generally enjoying the game if you're playing it that much, which is cool. But you do get a lot of people coming in and going, I thought this was going to be just a standard, typical twin stick shooter like Geometry Wars, and this is really difficult, and we're trying to introduce these other elements without making it too like frustrating to play. It's part of why we think the battery mechanic's interesting, in that it lets you kind of keep going even if you really suck straight away, and it does still get very difficult, but it kind of lowers the barrier at the initial like first hour that you play the game.
Seems like you've got a lot of really solid ideas that kind of bounce off one another really well. And from what I've seen of the way that you have interacted with people on the forums who are making suggestions or complaining about things, you've got a very strong idea of what kind of game you want to make. Are there ideas that haven't been able to fit into that design doc that you've got? Are there things that you really wish could be wedged in there but haven't been able to get in?
Levels with a lot of movement going through them, a more traditional, like an arcade game where you travel through the level and fight a boss at the end, are something that we at one point wanted to put in the game, but ultimately that felt really forced, and like we had to have a lot of arbitrary, I think is the key word, arbitrary rules and changes that your player would just have to learn rather than naturally understanding based on like the mechanics of the game. So we've really tried to stay true to, if you can understand the basics, the things we teach in the tutorial, you can pretty much extrapolate an understanding of exactly what the game's going to do from there, because we really dislike it when we have to go, okay, we'll just set a 3-second cooldown on this because it's unbalanced, even though it doesn't make any sense, or we'll do something because it needs to be that way as opposed to doing something because it should be that way.
Hello and welcome back to Z Games. We've been talking to Nat from Witchbeam Studio, who made a game called Assault Android Cactus. Well, I guess you're still making it because we can play it on Steam's Early Access, and there is a demo which people should check out if they're interested in the game. But it isn't finished, right?
No,
How far away from being finished is it?
We were hoping to be finished in November, and then we released on Early Access, and that kind of slowed us down a little bit because we started taking on board a lot of feedback, and like the good kind of slowdown where we started really evaluating our changes against thousands of people playing the game, and then we actually slowed down ourselves just over the holiday break. So we're still hoping early this year, like first quarter, to be finished on PC and then come into consoles later on. And as you said, there is a demo. I promised myself I'd mention this, but if you're on any operating system, Windows, OS X, Linux, even SteamOS, go and download it and check it out. I've heard it works with the Valve controller, but I haven't tested it myself.
Let's talk about the characters that you can play as in Assault Android Cactus.
Well, it's a good question, actually, because good topic, because there's a lot of characters. It's one of the things about the game that we opted to go into really early was build a solid character base and try and give them a lot of identity. So there's Cactus, obviously, who's the title character. They're kind of generic in some ways, but still interesting heroine of the story. And she uses a machine gun and a flamethrower as her two weapons. So one of the elements of the game is that every character has two unique weapons that give them their gameplay identity and then tie into also their personality. So Cactus, with her kind of gung-ho, get things done attitude, uses the machine gun. And then you have Holly, who's the next android, and she's got a seeker, and she's kind of a bit more timid personality and behavior, so she's using a gun that can go around corners and you don't have to get in people's faces.
Yeah, I like Holly. What are you saying about me?
I'm saying that her secondary
You're a
weapon...
coward.
Yeah, I like playing a character where you don't actually have to aim very much because the weapons do the aiming for you and you can concentrate on running away.
But see, it's a good character for that then. She's
Yep.
definitely got a beginner-friendly weapon in the primary. But then,
Beginner-friendly weapon, Jody.
I know what I am.
Haha.
but then her secondary weapon is a cannonball, which moves at a ridiculously slow speed, but just goes through enemies and can hit an almost infinite number of them. So if you're good with Holly, it means that you're good at kind of dodging and weaving and staying away from the enemies, and then knowing when to just like plow through 100 of them at once.
Don't make a smug face at me.
So all of the characters they're all androids. They're all named after plants, right? This took me a ridiculous amount of time to realize, because Holly is just like a normal name, and then I was like Cactus, and then there's another character named Lemon, and then
That's a fruit.
I unlocked Aubergine
Yes.
last of all. So it took me a while to notice this trend. But the other trend, all of the androids are women,
Yep.
which I like because I'm sick of playing dudes in video games. And we're crap at combat because we fall over in our tight pants, and then we have to just groom our beards, and that's just boring.
Yeah.
It's not so much a decision of like the fact that we didn't want to have male characters, but we formed like a trend early on where we designed a couple of female characters, and we went with the plant thing. We screwed up on the plant thing because we named one of them Coral, which is not a plant.
No.
But, close enough.
Yeah, I mean, dolphins are basically fish, and coral is basically a plant.
Don't make
Nobody
me sad.
cares.
The other 7 are all named after plants. And, yeah, we had them as women, and it just worked out in the end that we were designing them that way. And then after the first 3 or 4, we went, okay, let's keep with this trend and make them all the same. That has other benefits as well, in that we can keep them all roughly in the same space of like character size and silhouettes and other elements like that help for gameplay as well.
You guys are launching the game this year on PS4 and PS Vita, as you mentioned earlier. It really just
And Wii U.
And the Wii U. Yeah, sorry, I forgot about the Wii U, but it seems as though
That's
everyone
okay,
else
you're not
has.
alone.
Dang.
It just blows my mind that, someone living in Brisbane, someone that I know has a game coming out for the PS4. I mean, that's pretty incredible, right?
We think it's pretty incredible. We certainly didn't expect to be able to do this. Like, first thing we did when we started developing the game was think what's going to be possible. Well, all right, we know we can put it on PC. We couldn't even put it on Steam at the time. We ended up winning a competition, which thankfully got us an agreement to release on Steam. So for a long time, it was just going to be our own website on PC at some point in time. And then we started talking to console guys, and at the time we talked to Microsoft, and they told us to go away in terms you can understand.
I see.
Because they didn't do that kind of thing. Indie games, what are they? And then we talked to Sony, and Sony were like, wow, we love your game, and like we want this on all of our platforms. What do we do to make that happen? And kind of the same thing with Nintendo. So
Wow.
that was really surprising in a good way for us.
How did you find out? Like, do Mr. and Mrs. Sony just pick up the phone and give you a call?
Well, we contacted them initially. So I asked around some friends who you contact, and I got one contact, but all they really did was direct me to the website where you fill out some forms. They actually have a really clean procedure in place for anyone who wants to make a PS4 or Vita game. There is I can't remember the website right now, but you go there and there's just a form that you fill out saying, what your company is, what type of game you want to make.
Is it a PDF?
No, it's a custom form
even better.
of some kind. And then they'll get back to you about, what's happening, and they'll assign you an individual manager for your team. But we ended up talking with Shahid Kamal from Sony Europe, as we're in Australia, we fall under their jurisdiction. And he's just the nicest guy. You wouldn't believe how much of an effort or what he puts into to help us. We weren't even PlayStation exclusive, and he put us up on the big, massive wall behind the Sony CEOs at Gamescom when they were announcing all their indie games and things. So, and then featured us on their blog and everything.
Wow.
Yeah, you've done pretty well with the press so far. I did see that Rock Paper Shotgun did an amazing thing on their website where their first post about the game was one of their writers, Cara Ellison, rewriting an MIA song to be about your game.
It was awesome.
That was incredible.
Yeah.
Kara's a fantastic writer. So yeah, we've done pretty well. People like the game when they play it, which is a good sign. We've struggled a lot to get people to look at the game initially, but once you have once one person covers you, some other people want to cover you. It's like a catch-22 though for people beginning. So
I'm sure that all of our listeners are going to rush out and grab that demo.
excellent.
Where are they going to grab that demo
From Steam. So you just go to Steam, you look for Assault Android Cactus or through the Early Access program, and it's there. There's no DRM or anything. There is a humble version of the game you can buy as well, but none of the versions have DRM, so power to people who like to not have restrictions, I guess.
Excellent. When the PS4 launched, one of the runaway hits was Resogun, which I've been told is not a bullet hell game. It's just a straight-up shoot 'em up. But that was, an old-style arcade shooting game made by an indie team that had a huge spotlight on it because, it was one of the only decent, polished, exclusive PlayStation 4 games available at launch. Do you think that the PlayStation 4 Slim lineup will assist you in getting extra coverage for the game?
I think by the time we're out on PS4, there should be a pretty healthy lineup of games, which is unfortunate in some ways, but since I own a PS4, I'm kind of happy about it. But yeah, it's possible there not being too many games like ours could help us. I'm hoping by then that people's euphoria over Resogun has died down a little. Sorry, people, but that's my legitimate hope, so that you are ready to go and pick up another arcade shooter. Our game's going to be out there, and I don't know, Resogun's pretty awesome, so going up against it directly didn't seem like the best idea either.
So many particles in that game.
It does have a lot of particles.
Do you have close to the amount of particles?
We have a lot of particles,
There
but
are.
I don't think it's possible to be close to that amount of particles.
Yeah. And there's only 3 of you guys in the studio. I mean, that seems remarkable to me that you can pull off a game that will be available on PS4 in a few months with just 3 dudes. I imagine there's a lot of multitasking, a lot of wearing different hats a lot of the time. I mean, you're a developer on the game and you're here doing publicity, so
Yep.
I guess I must be onto something there, right?
And he is wearing multiple hats right now, listeners.
Yeah, I've got like 3 on my head and 1 on my foot as well. You just can't see it. But I wear a bunch of hats. I do some of the business stuff, and I do a lot of the PR side, I think, because mostly Tim and Jeff are busy doing other things that are far more important to finishing the game, and I'm kind of slack. But it just comes with the territory, I think, being 3 people. We couldn't have done it, though, without the engine that we're using, which is Unity. Highly, highly recommend that to people who are thinking, do I write my own engine or do I not? Because if you don't, you could probably use Unity and be on any platform in the world, without spending 3 years writing your own.
Excellent. All right. Well, thank you very much for joining us today, Nat. It was an absolute pleasure having you.
Jody, you have been playing Particulars.
Yeah, Particulars is a game developed by See-Through Studios in Australia, and it's a game about physics. There are a lot of games we call physics puzzlers because, like Portal, they involve manipulating physics, but this is an actual game about physics in which you control a subatomic particle. You control a quark, which, I won't get into the physics, but I have learned a surprising amount from playing this game. You are this tiny little subatomic ball that bounces around with a glowing, shimmering neon trail, trying to avoid anti-quarks, which will annihilate you if they come in contact with you, while attracting the opposite kind of quarks, which are up quarks, and you're a down quark. There are 6 flavors of quarks, and now I know all about them. There are up, down, top, bottom, strange, and charm quarks. That's what physicists call things, because physicists are insane.
They're fun.
Yeah. But what's interesting about this game is, as well as the physics thing where you're bouncing around as this little ball trying to survive, in between each level, there's a story, because you're actually playing the role of a physicist who is performing these experiments, controlling these quarks. And between each level of the game, you get to hear a little bit more of her story. And it's about this Australian woman and how she became a physicist and what it was like for her working in science and what her childhood was like. It's really in-depth for a game which is about bouncing balls around. There's this character of Alison and how she went to school and what her life was like, and she narrates this stuff. It's really great to hear a pretty Australian accent, she's pretty ochre, but authentic, right? It's an actual Australian game. So the Australian accents you hear in a game like Dead Island, which sound kind of like they might be from Australia sometimes, and then the rest of the time they're basically Irish New Zealanders. So it's really nice just to hear an actual Australian voice and to have this context for the game, because the actual physics of it are about the relationships between, particles of different polarity and different charges and trying to get them together, and her life kind of mirrors that in a way that's actually really clever and interesting, so it stops just being a game that's about bouncing balls around.
Yeah, I got to play this at a trade show, and I found that I was getting really, really drawn into these monologues that would happen in between the levels, and then I also did not have enough time to understand the the actual gameplay itself, because there was a lot of madness happening around me. But I did find it was strangely, it was kind of incongruous, and yet it felt like it was all part of the same package. How do they tie these two very, very disparate elements together?
Well, that's one of the things that's still a bit rough about it, because Particulars is another game that's in early access. It's not finished yet. So when you're playing it, you're playing, a game that's maybe 3/4 done, and one of the things that isn't finished are the cutscenes that explain more of the story than the monologues. So you get the shape of the story and impressions of the characters who are in it, but I don't actually know what's happening. Like, I'm not sure, how this machine works. Halfway through, you find out that Allison, this scientist, has discovered a machine that lets her control quarks and has no idea where it came from. And I was like, what? I thought I invented this. Mechanically, it's all there. So there's enough of it to play and to get an idea of the actual fun of the game, which is all about these insane manipulations where you have to change your polarity. Like, you glow either red or blue, depending on your polarity, and so you will attract the similar polarity and repel the opposite polarity. So there are these black anti-quarks bouncing around and following you. You have to shift your polarity to dodge them, which is a mechanic that's not like anything else in a game I've seen. It's really original.
That is Particulars, which is made by an Australian developer.
See-Through Studio.
Well, that brings us to the end of this episode of Z Games. As usual, thank you very much for listening. Big thanks to Nat for coming in and chatting with us today. All right, we'll catch you next week, where we'll be talking with a couple of guys from Halfbrick Studios.
Thanks for listening. This has been Z Games, recorded live in Brisbane on 4ZZZ and heard nationally thanks to the Community Radio Network. For more information on the show and to join the Z Games community, head to our website, zgamesau.net. That's spelt Z-E-D, or send us an email at contact@zgamesau.net. You can also find us on Facebook and Twitter. Z Games is produced with the assistance of the Community Broadcasting Foundation.